Hello, welcome to Global Lens with me, Parikshit Luthra. Let's begin with all the top stories from around the world. A trade deal between India and the United States before the August 1st deadline is unlikely. Sources say the deal is stalled after US proposed 20% tariffs on India and expected zero tariffs in return, similar to Indonesia and Vietnam. Access to agriculture and dairy remains a flashpoint. Israeli forces continue to pound Gaza. Over 50 Palestinians, including 14 aid seekers, have been killed since dawn. People in the enclave grapple with severe starvation and malnutrition. Foreign ministers of 25 nations call for an immediate ceasefire, say suffering in Gaza has reached a new depth. Ukraine's Zelensky says Russia and Ukraine to hold a new round of peace talks in Istanbul tomorrow. However, Russia says there's no reason to hope for a miraculous breakthrough, adds that it will pursue its own interests and fulfill tasks set from the beginning. First up, the global market check. Most Asian markets ended higher. Japan shrugged off political uncertainty and investors assessed the resilience of earnings on Wall Street despite tariff threats. Japan's Nikkei, Hong Kong's Hang Seng, China's Shanghai and the Korean Kospi ended in the green. However, it was a range-bound session on Dalal Street with the Nifty and Sensex ending the day flat with a slight negative bias. It's a mixed bag across Europe. The French CAC and German DAX ended with cuts while the British FTSE was flat. Wall Street opened in the green after hitting record highs in yesterday's session. Our top story this evening, a trade stalemate continues between India and the United States with no deal expected before the 1st of August deadline. Sources tell CNBC-TV18 that Washington had offered India a trade framework similar to its recent deals with Indonesia and Vietnam. However, talks have hit a roadblock. The US is pushing for a 20% tariff on Indian goods while seeking zero tariffs in return. It also wants agriculture and dairy included in the pact. As per sources, India has declined to hold any further talks for the moment. The American negotiating team is expected to visit India in August in an effort to find common ground before September or October. Currently, the US imposes a 10% baseline tariff on Indian exports. That's separate from the sectoral tariffs on steel and aluminium and autos. To discuss this, we're now joined by Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO of US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Mr. Aghi, thank you very much for joining us. The Indian negotiating team has returned, but does any deal look unlikely before the 1st of August now?
Well, the current scenario is such that the cabinet of US government had recommended a deal to the president. And president basically came back and said that I want a deal which is similar to Indonesia and Vietnam. When you look at the Indonesian deal and Vietnam deal, they are basically one-sided deal, where in the case of Indonesia, basically zero tariff on US goods coming into Indonesia, full market access to agriculture, dairy, and also Indonesia will buy roughly $15 billion worth of US energy and place order of over 50 777 Boeing planes, and almost 20% tariff on Indonesian exports to the US. So it is not a reciprocal deal. It is a one-sided deal. And you can't take the same model and apply it to India, where India has a $200 billion trade agreements between the two countries, and that trade is going up and up itself. But more important is India is a much larger economy with over 4 trillion in GDP, and more important is 1.4 billion people. So I think the government of India has pushed back because they would like to have a reciprocal partnership, a fair deal, which is win-win for both countries, and that's where the whole negotiations have stalled.
If there is no deal, and currently the likelihood of it is almost next to impossible, will India see 26% reciprocal tariffs imposed from the 1st of August, with the US government now saying that that deadline, 1st August deadline, is very, very clear?
Well, there's a lot of possibilities, but we have seen deadlines being moved forward multiple times. I think it is in the interest of India, it is in the interest of US to come to a common platform and drive a win-win value proposition between the two countries. You also have to understand the other complexities here. There is a stress point from Trump administration and BRIC nations, where basically there's a threat of imposing massive tariff on BRIC nations if they go from de-dollarization. Then you have what you call as Lindsey Graham bill, which is about to be put in front of the Senate, and which imposes basically 100% tariff if you buy Russian oil. So it is a complex environment, and but also a very dynamic environment. But both Indian side and the US side are trying to see if they can find a common ground. But more importantly, you have to understand that India cannot strike a deal which is one sided. It cannot strike a deal where it opens up its farm sector completely to the US, and especially on religious ground on the dairy side also.
Right. Uh, does it look very difficult at this point to have a deal at all? Uh, because, you know, the Trump administration has been making positive noises, but if they continue demanding a one-sided deal and concessions on agriculture and dairy, these are absolute red lines. We will not compromise. In fact, the Commerce Minister has said that whatever we do, we will not compromise the interests of farmers, the MSMEs and Indian workers in any trade deal for that matter. So if the Indian government is publicly taking that stand, clearly something is not right.
Well, that's understandable. I think when you have a 60% of the population working on the agriculture and producing roughly 16 to 17% of GDP, so they are on subsistence, and you don't want to expose them. On the dairy side, it is important to understand it's a religious issues because the cows are fed meat products in the U.S. and you can't basically take the same product and feed it to the Indian population. I think the U.S. side understands that. It's just a matter of trying to work the process within the administration. And but more important is the relationship between the two countries. It's not just on trade. It's a much bigger relationship. You have a large Indian diaspora, which is contributing to the local economy. There are geopolitical issues where India and US are aligned very, very strongly. Yes, there will be some disagreement on the trade side, which is understandable. India has to protect its farmers. India has to protect basically its economy. At the same time, US is saying, hey, we want a fair trading agreement with its partners, including India. So I think it's a matter of time when both countries can come to some kind of understanding. At the moment, the sentiments are high, and US is insisting because it won a one-sided deal with Indonesia, with Vietnam, and also if you look at with China, in the sense is this US is basically putting almost 55% tariff on Chinese goods coming into the US, while its exports to the US is much, much lower level. So I think what we are seeing is a one-sided process taking place, and India is one of the first countries which is kind of pushing back and saying, "Hey, listen, let's talk. Let's make sure we have a deal which is win-win and fair for both nations."
The US negotiating team led by Brendan Lynch is supposed to come to India in August now for the 6th round of talks. What's going to be the purpose of those negotiations, considering there's been no headway before the 1st August deadline?
The objective is to find a common ground. You have to understand that India is still a growing economy. It is a economy which is one-fourth the size of the US and much less itself. And its exports does have a trade surplus, but I think India is committed to buy more energy from the US to bring that to a balance itself. The objective here is to find, you don't have to open a full agriculture sector. For example, lentils can be exported from US to India because India is one of the largest consumer and also importer of lentils. Or you can look at soya. India does not basically grow so much soya. At the same time, India does not consume so much soya, but soybean, and so it's important. So I think what we have to do is just don't have a blanket agriculture segment, break it down, see where the farmers are impacted, for example, in rice, wheat, and maize, and look at other possibilities, opening the dry fruits, opening some of the fruits area. So we just need to get more granular in every aspect and ensure that we are able to find a common ground and drive this trade deal to a win-win value proposition.
Right. Just to also ask you, do you expect both leaders to pick up the phone and talk to each other anytime soon? Or do you feel that the temperatures are way too high right now?
I don't think the temperatures are high. I think you have to understand the style is different. You have a president who is a center of power, who is focused more on micromanaging almost every aspect of the uh, policy decision coming out of Washington D.C., and so he gets involved in every decision making. Whereas in India, you have again, just like U.S., a democracy, and you have a cabinet which drives. You have the opposition which questions the basically the ruling party itself. So the process are very, very different. And I think it makes no sense at this stage, either the president or the prime minister getting on the phone and having a conversation, because unless you find a common ground to take this forward, you will be wasting a phone call between the two leaders.
Right. And finally, Mr. Aghi, before we let you leave, if US goes ahead and imposes a 26% tariff on India on the 1st of August, along with all the sectoral tariffs, this could finally damage the prospect of any future deal?
No, that's not the end of the world. I think when you look at the current 10% tariff on Indian goods, we are seeing the exports are still going up. Part of it is being consumed by the local buyers in the US, and part is being borne by the exporters itself. So when you go from 10 to 26%, yes, it's going to be challenging. It's going to hit the profits. It's going to make Indian goods more expensive in the US. But that is not the end of the world. You have to understand that there are certain principles that has to be adhered to, and there's certain protection and red lines which you cannot be crossed. In the case of India, is the farm sector, is the dairy sector. And so it's important that we need to keep on explaining to the US side that why is critical. Let's take a smaller pie, make that a successful, and keep on working on the bigger pie at later stage. So I don't think if India gets hit by 26% tariffs, that's the end of the world, because there are bigger things to protect, and that's what the government is trying to do.
All right. Thank you, Mukesh Aghi, for joining us on Global Lens with your view on what's really stopping the two nations from having some sort of trade agreement before the 1st of August. And even though 26% reciprocal tariffs may come into effect, that's really not the end of the world. Amid the stalemate with USA, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to visit the United Kingdom tomorrow. In a big boost to bilateral ties, he is expected to sign the free trade agreement, which was finalized in May. This will be Prime Minister Modi's first visit to the UK since Keir Starmer came to power. The two leaders met at the G7 summit last month and at the G20 summit in Brazil last November. Top leaders from both countries have also held high-level engagements recently. UK's Foreign Secretary David Lammy visited India just last month, while External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar visited London in March. Now let's understand why India-UK ties are so crucial. Trade between the two nations hit $55 billion in 2024. That's a jump of 10% over 2023. UK is the sixth largest investor in India with a cumulative FDI of $36 billion between 2000 and March 2025. India has invested nearly $20 billion in the UK during this period. About 700 British companies operate in India and 1,000 Indian companies operate in the UK. They have a combined turnover of $150 billion and employ more than 6 lakh people. Technology is one of the key pillars of the bilateral ties. The two countries launched the Tech Security Initiative last year to boost cooperation in telecom, AI, critical minerals and semiconductors, among others. The UK is also one of India's largest international research and innovation partners. Beyond business, education is another key pillar. The UK is among the most preferred destinations for Indian students to study abroad. As of the academic year 23-24, 170,000 Indian students are in the United Kingdom. The Southampton University opened a new campus in Gurugram this month. UK and India also boast a strong defence and security cooperation, with their armed forces holding regular military exercises. Last year, the nations signed a statement of intent to boost cooperation in electric propulsion technology. The UK Carrier Strike Group will also do a port call in Mumbai in October. the climate partnership is crucial too. UK is a participant of the International Solar Alliance, an initiative by India and France to promote solar energy and address climate change. The UK also provides technical expertise to the India-led Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. The UK is among the top 10 countries with the highest Indian population overseas. More than 1.8 million Indians live in the UK, making up about 2.7% of the country's total population. On that note, we take a short break here, but coming up, China begins construction of a mega hydropower project in Tibet at an estimated cost of $170 billion. How will this major dam affect India? We discuss the implications with strategic affairs expert Brahma Chellaney on the other side. Welcome back. China has started building what will be one of the world's largest hydropower dams in Tibetan territory. This would be built on the Yarlung Sangpo River, which will cost approximately $167 billion and could potentially impact millions in India and Bangladesh. Here's why. The river flows downstream into Arunachal Pradesh and eventually into Bangladesh. However, Beijing has said that the scheme will prioritize ecological protection and boost local prosperity. Chinese Premier Li Qiang presided over a ceremony marking the start of construction on the Yarlung Sangpo River just before the river bends into India's Arunachal Pradesh as the Brahmaputra. The dam will be constructed at a major gorge in the Himalayas where the river makes a U-turn before flowing into Arunachal and eventually into Bangladesh. Once completed, the mega dam is expected to generate more than 300 billion kilowatt hours of electricity annually, which is enough to power over 300 million people. However, it could spell worry for India as Delhi keeps a close watch on its construction, as it could be a water bomb exacerbating floods in monsoons, or it could steal water in dry seasons. Remember, Beijing had planned the project for several years. It got the green signal in December last year, linking the development to the country's carbon neutrality targets and economic goals in the Tibet region. India's Ministry of External Affairs had earlier said that China had been urged to ensure that the interests of the downstream states of the Brahmaputra were not harmed by activities in upstream areas. Strategic Affairs expert Brahma Chellaney joins us now. Mr. Chellaney, how do you think this project is important for the Chinese government?
First, let's remember that this mega project was approved by China's National Assembly in March 2021, and satellite imagery since then suggests that the groundwork began much earlier than the recent groundbreaking ceremony by the Chinese premier. This project, once completed, will dwarf the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze. The Three Gorges Dam is the world's largest dam currently, but this Three Gorges Dam has caused immense devastation in downstream Yangtze. And the super dam on the Brahmaputra that China is now building is on a much larger scale. It's expected to generate 3 times as much hydropower as the Three Gorges Dam. So the devastation this super dam will cause to the Brahmaputra will likely be greater than the devastation caused by the Three Gorges Dam to the Yangtze.
Right. You know, the Arunachal Chief Minister Pema Khandu has expressed concerns that the Brahmaputra and the Siang could dry up completely once this dam is completed. How do you think this is going to impact India's water resources?
The super dam is poised to alter the hydrological reality for millions of people living downstream. It could destabilize an already vulnerable Himalayan ecosystem and arm China with a powerful new lever over India. Let's remember that this ultra dam is being built just before the Brahmaputra exits Chinese controlled territory and enters India. So by building this super dam, Beijing gains the capacity to manipulate cross-border flows, especially in the critical dry season. China can also withhold vital sediment and potentially weaponize water in future disputes. Excuse me. Sediment is a nutrient-rich element which rivers carry from the mountains. And when a river floods during the monsoonal season, as the Brahmaputra does every year, it spreads the silt-laden waters onto the plains, helping to refertilize overworked soils and to sustain fisheries. So, by capturing silt-laden waters before they reach India and Bangladesh, the super dam will starve downstream plains of nutrient-rich sediment, and the delta in Bangladesh, which is already under pressure from rising seas, will shrink further and become more vulnerable to salt water intrusion and flooding. And equally worrying is the likely disruption of the Brahmaputra's natural flooding cycle. We know that every summer during the monsoons, the Brahmaputra overruns its banks and floods vast areas in India and in Bangladesh and causes great destruction, including deaths. But these seasonal floods, far from being destructive by default, play a vital ecological role. They flush out toxins, recharge groundwater, and they deposit fresh layers of fertile soil. So, this interruption of the annual flooding cycle could spell disaster for Assam's agrarian economy and for Bangladesh, where millions depend on the Brahmaputra's rhythms for their livelihoods.
Right. Mr. Chellaney, even in the past, we have seen how China has refused to cooperate or share data on rivers, especially in the monsoon season when there could be flooding. They've not shared the data with India, especially during times of crisis between the two countries or when the two countries were embroiled in some sort of conflict. What is the likelihood of China weaponizing the world's largest dam that they are building now in the Tibetan region?
It's a good question. China has regularly weaponized the sharing of hydrological data, even though the sharing of such data is based on bilateral agreements with India, and India pays for such data in advance. And yet, periodically, China has halted the sharing of hydrological data to express displeasure with Indian actions or statements. Similarly, by building the super dam just before the Brahmaputra enters India, China potentially is creating leverage that it can weaponize. It'll have the capacity to manipulate cross-border flows. It could use the dam actually to reinforce its territorial claim to Arunachal Pradesh. Let's not forget that super dam is coming up right on the Tibet-Arunachal Pradesh border, and the fact that China shows Arunachal Pradesh as part of China, clearly that element should not be lost in understanding the larger implications of this super dam.
Right. My final question to you would be, China is spending about 167 billion US dollars on building this mega project, which will be the world's largest dam. How soon do you think China will be able to complete it? And number two, does India have any options at all?
China, in contrast to India, India's largest dam since independence has been the 2,000 megawatt Tehri Dam. The 2,000 megawatt Tehri Dam is not even large by Chinese standards. China really has the capacity to build giant dams and to build them in record time. We have seen that time and again, that China has managed to build giant dams in record time. They have done so, for example, on the Mekong, just before the Mekong River enters Southeast Asia. They have built 11 giant dams on the Mekong. Each was built in record time. Even the Three Gorges Dam was built in relatively shorter time than many outsiders had expected. So we should not forget that given China's record, that this super dam on the Brahmaputra might actually become a reality within a few years. Unlike the projects in India, the hydropower projects tend to take many, many years. In fact, some projects take even decades in India. By contrast, we should expect that this super dam would become a reality within some years.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chellaney, for joining us on a very important story with long-term strategic implications for India. On Final Cut this evening, a video filmed by Reuters captured the moment an Israeli airstrike hit a building in Gaza. The video showed people running for cover. More than 58,000 people have been killed since the war began in October 2023. This includes over 800 Palestinians who were killed while seeking aid. 28 countries, including the UK, Canada and Japan, have issued a joint statement calling for an immediate end to the war. That's all for today on Global Lens. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.